All right, here we are in an adult Bible study. It's Thursday morning, February the something, and we're gonna pick up where we left off last time. 2 weeks ago when we met, we were talking about Jesus going from the region of Galilee down through Samaria. Um, and the brothers James and John didn't like the way that they were received, so they were ready to call down fire from heaven on top of those Samaritan cities. Jesus talked about what it cost to follow him, which always prompts a lot of discussion. You know, uh, Jesus has the ability to look through a person's, whatever that is, heart, mind, or soul, or something, to see what's going on and to identify exactly what it is, what's going on inside them. Now, I want to follow you, Jesus, but, and so the answer that Jesus gives to all of the men who want to follow him is essentially, there's a lot of other things in the world. Some of them are really good things, but nothing can be more important than following me. Not your family, not a home, not obligations, nothing can take place. There should be nothing that gets in the way of you following me with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Um, and those words are kind of hard to hear. Being his disciple means you have a very close attachment to him, and everything else takes a distant second. Spouses, children, jobs, whatever, those those cannot come before Jesus. And that brings us to Matthew 11, verses 20 to 24. Robert's already pointed out that feels like we're going backwards because we've been in Matthew 16 months ago, looking at Peter's confession. And so I will say that the short answer is that not everything is in perfect chronological order in the New Testament. Sometimes it's arranged by what happened next and then what happened next, and sometimes it's more about themes and lessons that Jesus is trying to teach in general. So that's Matthew 11:20. So that is the best explanation I have for why we're going backwards in Matthew, but not necessarily backwards in Luke. So Matthew 11:20 says, then Jesus began to denounce the towns in which most of his miracles had been performed because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be lifted to the heavens? No, you will go down to Hades. For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you that it will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment than for you. Okay. Jesus has been performing miracles. He's been teaching and going around the area around Galilee for some time. And we've noticed as we've gone through that sometimes there's a favorable reaction. Sometimes there is not a favorable reaction. Sometimes they pick him up and want to throw him over the side of the cliff. And sometimes they want to make him the king of Israel. But what Jesus is pointing out here is that he has performed miracles all over Galilee. And too often there hasn't been the right kind of response to what he has said and done. I can't point to any of them specifically off the top of my head, but in some of those instances where Jesus performed a miracle, it doesn't say that anybody believed, but it will say something like, and the people were amazed at the miracle Jesus performed. Or they gave thanks to God for that miracle, which is nice, but Jesus didn't perform miracles so people would go, wow, that is super neat. He performed miracles to show that he had authority from God, and so people would turn to him and believe in him. But that is not often the case. They're more impressed with the flash of it or the spectacle of it or the cool factor than they are willing to say, oh my goodness, this must be the Son of God. I should believe him and follow him. So that's why Jesus pronounces these woes against there's 3 cities here: Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. Now, on our map here, Chorazin is north and a little west of the Jordan River, north of the Sea of Galilee. Bethsaida, there are actually 2 sites that they're not sure which one is which. One is over here on the east side of the river. There's another one on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. And then Capernaum is right up here on this north shore. We've passed around the pictures before of some of the ruins in Capernaum, like the synagogue where Jesus taught, or Peter's house, which is right across the street from that. So they're all pretty close to one another. They're all in an area where Jesus performed miracles. So we can talk about them, each one of them, for just a minute. So Chorazin is about 2 miles from Capernaum. It's on sort of a high plateau above the shoreline. So I can't prove it, but it would seem like it was high enough on the hills that you'd be able from Chorazin to look south and to see most of the Sea of Galilee there. They have found ruins of the village. They have excavated a synagogue there, and found the remains of some sort of healthy Jewish religious center. It is possible that when Jesus talks about woe to Chorazin, he doesn't just mean the city. He could mean more like the region around it. I suppose we would do the similar thing here with like Salt Lake. We don't always mean Salt Lake City proper. We mean all of that mess that way.
So when they excavate like that, do they ever find bones, or is that a length of time that bones have disintegrated?
Sometimes they find bones specifically in cemetery areas where I'm throwing this one in for free. This is not in the notes. This one's just for free. So there was a thing. So all of the people who died in that period and in that place, their bodies would be put in like the family tomb. You know, a big hollowed out cave with a door or stone across the front. And over time, most of the body we'll just go with disappear. That seems like the nicest way to say it. And what would be left would be the bones. So the family would go in and collect up the bones of the dearly beloved and put them into this box. It's called an ossuary, which really sort of means bone box. They put the bones in there, and then you know, we just keep stacking up our family in the corner of the family vault. So it is not unusual for them to find ossuaries and bones of people in specific places like that. I don't know about just digging and finding bones. I just started getting Biblical Archaeology Review magazine just because it seemed like a fun thing to do. And so far, I haven't noticed that there's a lot of digging up of bones, but there's a lot of pottery fragments and clay tiles and metal things that get dug up. So it would have to be sort of a catastrophic burial for them to find bones inside a house or inside a temple or tabernacle or something. You know, like in at Mount Vesuvius, where everybody died all at once, right where they were standing. Otherwise, everybody's going to be in the cemetery or in the mausoleum or something like that. Like I said, I'm not charging you for that. That one is extra. That's okay. I do think that if I needed a different job to do, that being an archaeologist would be super interesting, especially there. So. So that's Chorazin. There's Bethsaida. We've already said there are two of them. Important things happened in Bethsaida. At least 3 of the disciples were from there. The Gospels tell us that Philip was from Bethsaida, and apparently nope, we already said Philip. Peter and Andrew, brothers, were also from Bethsaida. The town means, the name means house of fishing or house of hunting. So it's not surprising that fishermen like Peter and Andrew would come from a town like that. It's close to where the Jordan River flows into the north end of the Sea of Galilee. It brings all of the water from Mount Hermon down all these little tributaries down into one river, the Jordan, that flows in here and then flows out of there to the Dead Sea. In John 1 or Mark 6, after the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus is walking on the water from Bethsaida toward another little city. There's lots of healing that takes place. In Mark 8, there is a blind man in Bethsaida who is healed from there. So there's records of miracles taking place in Bethsaida. And then the last one is Capernaum. And that's really Jesus's home base. In Matthew 8 and Luke 7, the Roman centurion asked Jesus there for help for somebody at home who is ill. It's in Capernaum that Jesus teaches in the synagogue and casts an evil spirit out of a man. And in those miracles, there is no note of anyone believing. It's in Mark 2 where where the four friends lower a paralyzed man through the ceiling of the house down so Jesus can heal him because the place is packed out. That takes place in Capernaum. And it says that the crowd praised God, but there's not any mention of anyone believing or following in Jesus. A royal official's son in Capernaum is healed by Jesus long distance in John 4. It says that family believed. And then when you get to John 6, after the feeding of the 5,000, we see actually Jesus losing followers in Capernaum because he says some things which the crowds have a hard time understanding or wanting to accept. So miracles are being done in those places, but there's not a lot of indication that much was changing in the relationship with Jesus. So he says, woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, Capernaum. You think you're going to go up at the end, but you're not. And then he compares them all to some other cities. The first pair is Tyre and Sidon. You might remember that it's not been that long ago in the gospel accounts where Jesus is like on some kind of a break. He tries to get away from everybody for a little while. He goes to the area of Tyre and Sidon where he's not going to let anybody know who he is. He's just going to rest. He's taking a break. Tyre and Sidon are way up here on the Mediterranean coast. It's pretty far from where Jesus has been. They're not necessarily very Jewish cities. They're a part of Phoenicia. You might remember from your studies a long time ago about Phoenician traders and sailors, and so it's kind of a more of a Gentile place than it is a Jewish place. But we did see when Jesus was there, back in Mark 7, that a Gentile woman has a daughter who's possessed by an evil spirit, and Jesus set her free. He becomes known in that area, and people come to see him and to experience him. I think the point has to be Capernaum, Bethsaida, Chorazin, Jewish cities full of Jewish people. You've got synagogues. You have rabbis there who teach. You have known about what the law says. You have known what the prophets have said about the one who is going to come to be the Messiah. Miracles have been performed in you, and nothing has happened. Nobody believes. You all are so far gone that places like Tyre and Sidon are going to be leaps and bounds ahead of you. They believe, but you don't. In Indiana, growing up, we told Kentucky jokes. We always made fun of Kentuckians because there was not much good that came out of Kentucky. I still like to make Kentucky jokes because I have a sister-in-law who's from Kentucky. One of my favorites of which is there are these two people stand on opposite sides of the Ohio River. And the Kentuckian really wants to come across to Indiana, but he can't swim. So the Indiana boy, the Hoosier, says, tell you what, brother, I'll turn my flashlight on and shine across the river, and you can just walk across on the beam of light. And the Kentuckian says, ha, 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 you're not going to fool me. I'll get halfway across and you'll turn it off. Yeah. That is sort of what's going on here. Tyre and Sidon who have no more sense about anything will believe when you don't. Why won't you repent? Why won't you believe? He talks about going down to Hades. Hades is the abode of the dead, the place of departed souls in the New Testament. Sometimes it's translated the grave, sometimes it's translated hell. It is the depths of misery and disgrace. Sorry, no, you are. So Capernaum might think, because they have a beautiful synagogue that's been around for centuries and it is a very busy town, very prosperous, that because of their everything they've accumulated, that they'll have a high exalted place. And Jesus says, no. No, you all will go down to the depths to Hades. And then if the thing about Tyre and Sidon isn't enough to make his point, he says to Capernaum, look, if the things that have been done in Capernaum had been done in the city of Sodom years ago, Sodom would still exist. They would have come to believe, even when you all haven't. I'm sure you know who Sodom is. If you go back to the book of Genesis, in Genesis 13, it tells us that the cities of that area were not great. They were full of a lot of wicked people, and specifically Sodom was full of extremely wicked people who were constantly rebelling against God. A few chapters later, we see in Genesis 19 that Lot and his family have moved to the city of Sodom because it's a pretty happening place. And angels come to tell Lot to get his family out of there because it's going to be destroyed for its wickedness. Lot and his wife and daughters turn tail and run out of the city as fast as they can. And Lot's wife looks back. She turns into a pillar of salt. Lot and his two daughters head off into the mountains, not knowing how widespread the destruction is. It's possible that they think that the entire world has been destroyed by what they've seen. But it's because of the incredible wickedness and ickiness and sinfulness of the city of Sodom that it is. Some people might tell you today that it's because they were inhospitable, that they didn't extend hospitality. That is not the case. It is because the city was rife with sexual sin, oozing out of every pore. So what Jesus says is even a bigger slap to Capernaum. I could go to the most wicked town full of the worst kind of people in history, perform the same miracles there that you all have seen, and they would have the good sense to change their ways. But Capernaum, you don't. He talks about repenting in sackcloth and ashes. Do you know what that is?
I do. When they were mourning, they wear a really coarse cloth and they would cover themselves in ashes as a sign of.
Okay, think sort of like burlap sacks. Not very nice. Rough and raggedy. And they would take the ashes and dust and they would rub it into the cloth. They would throw it on their heads as a sign of their grief or repentance or shame. It was reserved for like the very biggest stuff. The people in Sodom would repent and have absolute remorse over what they have done if they had seen what Jesus did. And Capernaum, for all of its wisdom and everything else, can't seem to do it. Any thoughts or comments or questions about any of that? Yes, sir.
So does that mean in Capernaum, that they didn't even believe Jesus was the Son of God? Or does it mean that they believed, but they just didn't change their ways?
Does it mean that that they didn't believe in him as the Son of God, or that they did believe but refused to change? I would have to say that probably there isn't much difference there, at least in Jesus's eyes. The perspective would be, if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, you will change your ways. You'll follow and you'll be different.
So
That there's not really a way for somebody to say, yes, he is the Son of God, but no, I'm not going to follow. We know that there were people from Capernaum who believed,
okay.
but sort of like in the general tone of the whole city is that people ignored Jesus. They were impressed by the miracles, like, well, that's something else. But there wasn't any change in their hearts or minds about who he was.
And even the guys people that he changed, that he healed, were those people not?
I think probably some of those people would have come to believe, like the guy who had an evil spirit cast out of him. I think obviously he would believe that Jesus had done something miraculous to him and was the Son of God. But in general, the people of the city, the people of the region, they're not picking up what he's laying down. They're impressed by the wrong thing and not committing themselves to following in his footsteps.
But if there were any there that believed and that did change their ways, they wouldn't have to go, would they be going to hell too, just like everybody?
No, if there are people who believe that Jesus is the Son of God, then they have a reward to look forward to.
Oh,
Those shun them or turn against them.
Probably.
Because they believe in
If somebody identified themselves, and that maybe that's part of why Jesus speaks so harshly about this city, is that the Jewish leadership, who have the benefit of hundreds of years, thousands of years of tradition and the law and the prophets and the Psalms, they have all of this information available to them. They should be able to understand who Jesus is. But rather than believing any of it, they look at the people who do believe him and say, you're an idiot. You're out. We excommunicate you. We don't want anything to do with you. It's one thing to not believe. It's another one to punish the people who do believe.
thank you.
You're welcome. All right, well, let's move on to the next piece then. Matthew 11:25. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Okay, it's not been very long ago, as we've studied, that Jesus has talked about the little children. You remember this at all? In the last month or so? where he has talked about the little ones, that it would be better to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea than to harm one of these little ones. Jesus is not necessarily just talking about small children. He is more talking here about those who have come to believe in him, those who are following him. It seems a little curious that Jesus would say something like, "I praise you because you've hidden things from the wise and learned." But that is not an uncommon statement in the Old and New Testaments, that that those who were the most educated, who had the most experience, who should have had the most insight, that they're so full of that information and knowledge, they're so proud that they cannot accept the truth when it comes. They're so busy, talking about what it means and debating it back and forth for hours and hours and hours, that they can't see the simple truth when it comes. I can't pull a passage up from my brain. But we have seen Jesus talk about that sort of a thing before, that the truth will be hidden from those who should have been able to understand it, but that to others who are not so wise, who are not so educated, that's in quotation marks, that they're the ones who are able to hear the truth and then to do something with it. It has to do with pride and humility, I think, basically, that the Pharisees and the Jewish leaders are so proud of all of their intelligence, all of their scripture memorization, all of their faithful execution of the law. But then you have all the people who don't feel that way, who are humble and low and barely hanging on. And Jesus says they're the ones who get it. They're the ones who understand what the message is, and they hear it and they receive it and they change their lives. Whereas you have every advantage and you can't be bothered with it because it didn't come in the package that you thought that it would. You might not see immediately how 28, 29, and 30 relate to the first verses there, 25 to 27. Jesus says at the end, "You who are weary, you who are burdened, come here, because I have something to offer you that you can manage." When he talks about being weary and heavy laden or burdened, he's talking about the weariness that comes from trying to carry around all of the law, all of those expectations, making sure that everything was, all the food was prepared just right, that your house was cleaned in just the right way, that your beard and your hair were just right, that the tassels on your clothes were just right, that you walked just the exact amount of steps that you should on a Sabbath day, that everything is just exactly right. This incredible burden of trying to follow all of those rules. I can't quote it to you, but in my years, I have heard lots of preachers and teachers talk about the fact that the Jewish leadership had a law for every day of the year and for every bone in the human body. It's like 612 commands or something like that. That everybody had to be aware of all of the time. I know when we leave the house and give AJ some rules for the evening, like two, he cannot remember two of them, let alone 600 different laws that range in everything from dietary laws to dress code and relationship laws and Sabbath laws. It's overwhelming. And Jesus knows that law wears people out. It was never intended to make people good. The law was always intended, we read later in Paul's letters, it was intended to show people that God's grace is better, that there was no way to keep the law because the law doesn't change our hearts or minds. They post a speed limit. I see that number and I think that's good for somebody, but not for me. Posting that speed limit doesn't make me want to do the right thing. All it does is show where I break the law. Jesus says, all you who are worn out, exhausted, just frazzled from trying to carry this burden that the Pharisees and the Jewish leadership have put on you, come here, come to me, because I have a much better deal. My rules are much more simple. My expectations, much more simple. Nothing is nearly as complicated. And he says, you come to me and I will give you rest. You'll learn from me. You'll find that Jesus is gentle and humble in heart. You'll find rest for your soul because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Jesus offers not this overwhelming urgency to follow all of the rules, but he offers rest. The word that he uses has to do with refreshing from your soul. Like when the soldiers in the military are on the march, they would take a rest to eat, to drink before they moved on to the next place. They would be restored. Jesus says, I can do that for you. Whereas the Pharisees and the scribes and the priests and all of those Jewish leadership people were very proud of what they had accomplished, very secure and confident in their own knowledge and righteousness. Jesus says, I'm humble in heart. I'm not like those people. What's more attractive, going to somebody who's full of themselves or somebody who will always make sure that everybody else is the most important person in the room? He talks about giving rest for the soul. And there was a quote from one of the commentaries talking about the blessed tranquility of the soul. And that sounds pretty good. That the rest that he has offered is blessed tranquility, that it is just peaceful and you can relax and be refreshed and restored. He talks about the yoke that comes, the burden. So the yoke that oxen would wear to pull a cart, to pull a plow, to pull a wagon. Sometimes that's a really heavy thing. That's a lot of work. And Jesus says, if you come to me, the yoke that I put on you is not so much. And the nice thing is that if we get into the yoke with Jesus, that he's the other one pulling. Okay. I probably don't have to do this in Utah, where we all have an understanding of pioneers and wagons. But so in the yoke that's coming back, there's a room for two horses, cows, donkeys, whatever. And um, Jesus says that he is in the yoke with us. And so we might be the smaller one, the weaker one, the not as powerful one, and that's okay because he really can do it all on his own. But he wants us to come alongside him, to move in the same direction, to be stuck together with him in that way. He doesn't have hundreds of obligations for his followers. He has just a few. Love God with everything you have. Love your neighbor as yourself. Very different kinds of approaches to life. And the thing that I wrote down here is that it is not always easy to follow Jesus, but it is simple. What do you think?
Question.
Mm-hmm.
So where did the Jewish rules and law originally come from? I mean, are they man-made or were they?
Well, some of them would have come directly from God, like the Ten Commandments that came on Mount Sinai.
That's true.
There are the books of Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus are full of legal code rules that God gave to the people for the way that they should eat, the way that they should drink, the way that they should interact with one another, the way that they should worship. There are rules that come from God, but for many of those rules, the Jewish leadership had further interpreted and applied them to everyday life. Probably in efforts to keep people from breaking the law, but then those extra guidelines became more important than the rules themselves. So you know, we're all here on the playground, and at the edge of the playground is a pit full of snakes and badgers.
Okay.
Okay. And we all know that it's there, and we have heard, don't go outside the border, because if you do, if you cross that line, the badgers and snakes will get you. So the teachers decide, you know what, we really want to make sure that none of the kids get close. So we're going to set up a fence here just to make sure that nobody ever gets close. And so the new boundary becomes more important to the teachers and to the children than the original one. I mean, there's all this room here where there's still lots of great things going on. There's space, there's freedom. But just in case, we're going to set up this barrier to make sure that nobody gets anywhere close to breaking it. And that's what the Jewish leadership have done over centuries, is God says the line is here, and they say, well, we don't want anybody to be in trouble, so we're going to set the line here, a half a mile before God. And that's the rule we're going to follow. We're going to be diligent about that, while we're going to ignore some of the easier and more applicable things, like, loving our neighbor, making sure that what we do is beneficial to our neighbor. I'm busy measuring out my spices to tithe on them, making sure that I've taken exactly the right number of steps on the Sabbath, that the corners of my beard are just as long as they're supposed to be. They're so focused on their interpretation and their own boundaries that they've kept themselves from some of the freedom that God has given to them. Does that make sense?
Yes, so they kind of added to it, like.
They definitely added to it, and what they added became more important than what God had originally said.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Anybody else have anything that strikes you? Or makes you ask questions?
Good.
Okay. Well then, we're going to call it here today. Again, I apologize about last week. I was really not feeling well at all. And, I would like to say that I feel super lots better now, but I'm not sure I can say that. Apparently I feel like I'm nearly 55, so that's as good as it's gonna get.
Oh, it gets better for you.
Oh, I can't wait.
Where's that for the rest of us? Yeah.
There's a lot of crap going on.
There is. And like last week, our whole entire small group was sick,
Wow.
except for me. So we will plan to meet next week on the 27th. Is that right? And then the following week, I will be at a conference in Indiana. I won't be around, so we won't meet on the 6th of March, all right? And then we'll meet about 3 weeks in a row. And then my family's going on a trip the first week of April. So we won't be around then for Bible study either. So
Just
just
that April
that's
first,
fine.
that's the Thursday's April first, is that the one?
Really?
No, not really, April 3rd.
Nope, not really.
Well, which one is it, Robert?
It's really April 3rd.
Yeah, April 3rd, I will be not here.
Where you gonna be? Ask. Where you go? Where you gonna be?
March the 6th and April the 3rd. Okay. Hey, thank you, friends. We're on Zoom for coming to join us today. Been lovely to have everybody say bye to Cody and Tina.
Bye.
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 Bye, Cody and Tina.
See you in a few.
Cody is in his kitchen
Oh,
and Tina is in her office.
In his kitchen.
oh, it's.
Okay.
But I'll be at lunch.
So will I.
All right. Well, then we'll see you when we see you.
Okay.